Deep in the mountains of northern Japan, there's a community where people speak a language so rare that only about 200 individuals in the entire world understand it. In the back streets of Melbourne, a group gathers weekly to practice an ancient art of whistling that can communicate complex messages across valleys. And somewhere in rural Romania, families still practice a form of healing that predates modern medicine by centuries. These aren't relics of the past or scenes from a documentary. These are living, breathing microcultures thriving in our modern world, and most people have no idea they exist. Today, we're diving into the hidden corners of human culture to discover communities so unique, so fascinating, that they'll completely change how you see the diversity of human experience. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of these groups are fighting desperately to survive in our increasingly connected world. Let's start with something that sounds impossible in today's world: a completely unique language spoken by fewer people than your high school graduating class. Hidden in the Yaeyama Islands of southern Japan exists the Dunan language, spoken by roughly 200 elderly residents of Yonaguni Island. But here's what makes this microculture absolutely fascinating. Dunan isn't just a dialect or a variation of Japanese. It's a completely distinct language with its own grammar, vocabulary, and even conceptual framework for understanding the world. Linguists who study it say that learning Dunan is as different from learning Japanese as learning French is from learning Chinese. The community that speaks this language has developed unique concepts that don't exist in other languages. Ways of describing time, nature, and human relationships that are completely their own. Imagine having thoughts that literally cannot be translated into any other language on Earth. That's the reality for Dunan speakers. But what makes this even more heartbreaking and urgent is that Dunan is dying. Every year, a few more speakers pass away, and younger generations on the island speak primarily Japanese. Researchers estimate that within the next 20 to 30 years, Dunan could be extinct. And when it dies, an entire way of seeing and understanding the world disappears with it. The community has started recording conversations, creating dictionaries, and even developing children's programs to try to save their language. But it's an uphill battle against the tide of globalization. This is the reality for many microcultures around the world. They're not just maintaining traditions, they're fighting for survival. Now let's travel to the opposite side of the world, to the mountains between Turkey and the Black Sea, where a different kind of microculture has existed for centuries. The whistling language of Kushkoi. Yes, you heard that right. An entire language communicated through whistles. But before you imagine simple bird-like sounds, understand that this is a fully functional language capable of expressing complex ideas, emotions, and even abstract concepts. The people of Kushkoi developed this unique form of communication out of necessity. Living in steep mountain valleys where neighbors might be a kilometer apart across a ravine, shouting simply didn't work. So over generations, they developed a whistling system that could carry across those vast distances, allowing shepherds to communicate with their families, warn of dangers, or simply chat with neighbors without making the exhausting journey across treacherous terrain. What's remarkable is the sophistication of this system. It's not a simplified code or a series of basic signals. Skilled whistlers can communicate anything they could say in their spoken language, Turkish, just by whistling. Brain imaging studies have shown that when people hear this whistling language, the same parts of their brain activate as when they hear spoken language. Their brains process it as genuine linguistic communication, not just as music or noise. For decades, Kushkoi's whistling language was fading as modern technology like cell phones made it less necessary. Young people saw it as old-fashioned, something their grandparents did. But here's where the story takes a hopeful turn. The community decided to fight back. They made whistling language a mandatory subject in local schools, hold annual whistling competitions, and have even created a small tourism industry around their unique communication method. Today, children in Kushkoi learn to whistle before they learn to read. And the microculture that was nearly extinct is experiencing a renaissance. But not all microcultures are defined by language. Some are built around practices, beliefs, and ways of living that seem impossible in our modern world. In the forests of Madagascar, there exists a community known as the Makia, who until very recently lived a semi-nomadic lifestyle in the dense forests, practicing what anthropologists call one of the last hunter-gatherer cultures on Earth, outside of the Amazon and a few other isolated regions. The Makia microculture isn't ancient history, it's happening right now. These families move through the forest seasonally, following honey harvests, tuber crops that grow wild, and forest resources that most people wouldn't even recognize as food. They have encyclopedic knowledge of the forest ecosystem, understanding which plants are edible in which seasons, how to find water during droughts, and how to navigate the dense forest without compasses or maps. What makes the Makia especially fascinating is their relationship with the outside world. They're not isolated by geography or lack of contact with modern civilization. Many Makia families move between their forest homes and nearby villages, participating in both worlds. They might spend 3 months living traditional forest life, then return to villages to trade, attend schools, or work seasonal jobs before returning to the forest. They've created a hybrid existence that allows them to maintain their cultural identity while also engaging with modernity on their own terms. It's a delicate balance, and one that's increasingly threatened as Madagascar's forests shrink due to logging and agriculture. The physical space that makes their microculture possible is disappearing, and with it, thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about living in harmony with one of the world's most unique ecosystems. Halfway across the world, in the remote valleys of the Caucasus Mountains, another microculture practices something that sounds like fantasy, a form of ritual combat that's part dance, part martial art, and entirely unlike anything else on Earth. The Kridoli tradition of Georgia combines acrobatic movements, traditional music, and a deep spiritual philosophy into something that defies easy categorization. Practitioners train for years to master movements that seem to defy physics, flipping and spinning while maintaining perfect balance and control. But Kridoli isn't about fighting or competition. It's a moving meditation, a way of connecting with ancestors, and a physical expression of Georgian identity and resilience. The microculture around Kridoli includes not just the practitioners, but entire families and communities who gather for performances, maintain the oral traditions of teaching, and preserve the specific rhythms and songs that accompany the movements. There are no written instructions for Kridoli, no YouTube tutorials or instruction manuals. Everything is passed from master to student through years of practice, correction, and embodied learning. In our age of instant information and online learning, this insistence on traditional transmission makes Kridoli increasingly rare. The number of true masters can be counted on 2 hands, and each one carries knowledge that took a lifetime to acquire and cannot be quickly replicated. What's striking about all these microcultures is what they represent. They're not just quaint traditions or interesting anthropological curiosities. They're fundamentally different ways of being human, alternatives to the increasingly homogenized global culture that dominates our modern world. When a microculture disappears, we don't just lose interesting practices or unique languages. We lose entire systems of knowledge, different approaches to problems, alternative ways of organizing society and understanding reality. The Dunan speakers have concepts about time that don't exist in other languages. The Kushkoi whistlers have trained their brains to process communication in ways most humans never develop. The Makia possess ecological knowledge about Madagascar's forests that science has barely begun to document. The Kridoli practitioners maintain physical and spiritual practices that could teach us things about human potential we don't yet understand. In our connected world, it's easy to assume that having access to all information and all cultures makes us richer. But there's a paradox here. As we gain access to everything, we risk losing the specific, the local, the deeply particular. Microcultures exist precisely because they're isolated, specific, and deeply rooted in particular places and communities. They can't be preserved in museums or recorded in databases and then forgotten. They only survive through living practice, through communities that wake up every day and choose to maintain ways of life that the modern world often sees as inefficient, outdated, or irrelevant. The question isn't whether these microcultures deserve to survive. The question is whether our world is impoverished by their loss, and I think the answer is undeniably yes. So what happens next? Some microcultures will disappear. That's inevitable. Languages with only a handful of elderly speakers will fall silent. Practices that require specific ecosystems will vanish as those ecosystems are destroyed. But others are finding ways to adapt, to create hybrid identities that honor tradition while embracing modernity. The success stories, like Kushkoi's revival of their whistling language, show us that microcultures don't have to choose between preservation and participation in the modern world. They can do both, but only if they receive support, respect, and most importantly, the freedom to define their own futures on their own terms. These hidden worlds exist all around us, often in plain sight. That elderly neighbor who speaks a language you've never heard of might be one of the last speakers of a dying tongue. That unusual practice you see in a small community might be the continuation of traditions thousands of years old. The diversity of human culture isn't just found in museums or history books. It's alive, evolving, and fighting for survival in communities around the world that most people will never hear about. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered a microculture, a community with practices or traditions so unique that they seemed like they belonged to another world entirely? Drop a comment below and share your experience. And if you found this journey into the hidden corners of human culture as fascinating as I did, make sure to subscribe to The Curious Route. We're constantly exploring the roads less traveled, the stories rarely told, and the perspectives that challenge how we see the world. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue discovering the incredible diversity of human experience. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next Curious Route.